Hi, my name is Tina Wadowski, and I'm a professor of animal behavior and welfare in the Department of Animal Biosciences. And it's my pleasure to welcome you and host the FW Present Memorial Lecture on behalf of the OAC and the Campbell Centre for the Study of Animal Welfare. How are we doing on our Zoom? We've got people zooming in tonight. Yeah, the numbers are climbing. Great. Thank you very much. Okay, so first to, where are we going? Great. Open this event. I'd like to acknowledge that here in Guelph, we're on the traditional lands and territory of the Mississaugas of the Credit First Nation. And the verse that you see here is an excerpt from the Thanksgiving address used by many First Nations across the regions we know today as Ontario and New York State. It's a beautiful expression of gratitude to the natural world, both the land and the animals, which is fitting for our gathering tonight. Now, I'd like to also acknowledge the support of the OAC Alumni Foundation, who supports this lecture. We haven't had one in almost a decade, I think. We had one planned, and then the pandemic happened, and then you know that the story after that. So it's a pleasure to resurrect this event and have everyone here. And so the Present Lecture allows us to bring in an internationally renowned animal welfare scientist to spend several days here at the University of Guelph in a public lecture, interacting with students, faculty, and also giving a number of talks. So it's really a pleasure to welcome Dr. Keeling here today. But before that, I would like to introduce Mr. Dwight Greer, who is the past chair of the OAC Alumni Foundation, to say a few words about the foundation that and Mr. Present for his generous support of this lecture series. Dwight.
Thank you very much, and I'd like to welcome you all here to one of the familiar sites for me. It's one of my favorite buildings in the whole campus because it's a lovely setting and lovely venue. And thank you, Dr. Wadowski, for allowing us to do a little bit of promotion for the Alumni Foundation. I appreciate that. The Fred Presant Memorial Lecture. Fred Presant was an important part of the OAC Alumni Foundation and its history. He was one of 7 visionaries who in 1959 initiated a movement to create a foundation for the OAC. This came to fruition on February 26, 1960s with the provincial letters of patent. We are now working on the 65th year of the foundation. Our mission statement is to assist OAC's development of Ontario's agri-food and rural leaders through fundraising. Fred Presant was born in Guelph in 1897. He went to war. He returned from serving in the World War, and that's World War I, of course, in Europe, and enrolled in Ontario Agricultural College, graduating in the first in 1921 and then again in 1923. He spent time or taught at Western Ontario Experimental Farm in Ridgetown until 1928. He then accepted a new challenge and took a job at Master Feeds and Toronto Elevators, fledgling companies which included Formula Feed Business, storage elevators on the Toronto waterfront, and lake freighters. He employed OAC graduates as much as possible and worked in close collaboration with the animal and nutrition scientists at OAC here and at Cornell University in New York. And he to develop formula-based feeds for poultry, livestock, and dogs. This subsequently led him to be a charter member of the Canadian Feed Manufacturers Association. Early in 1940, he was seconded to Ottawa to become the administrator for the flour, feed, grain under World War II wartime Price Trade Board. Fred Presant retired in 1962. And after being a founding director of the Alumni Foundation, as I mentioned earlier, in 1960, he became the first chair of the Board of Governors, vice chair, excuse me, of the Board of Governors at the University of Guelph, and that was when the university was formed in 1964. Mr. Presant passed away in 1996 with funds received from his family and friends of the late Fred Presant, a graduate of OEC 21 and OEC 23, the foundation supports the Center for Study of Animal Welfare and presenting the Fred Presant Memorial Lecture where we are this evening. Funds are available every second year for this lecture, and unfortunately, as Dr. Radowski mentioned, we have not had one since 2017, and I appreciate it. You organized the last one too, so thank you for that. Fred Presant also provided funds in his passing for the Fred W. Presant Scholarship, which is donated annually to a graduate student in plant agriculture or environmental biology who is conducting research on pesticides and their use in the food production crops. And the foundation would like to thank Professor Radowski very much for her longstanding support of the foundation and this lecture, which is important, and we'll hopefully be able to keep it going. We also want to, or I also, the foundation would also like to thank Karen Daynard, who did a lot of the lifting on this evening. So thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Dwight. And thank you to all the alumni who are here. There's a lot of alumni in this room. And yeah, great for coming. Thank you. So now it's my pleasure to introduce Dr. Keeling. Linda Keeling is a professor of animal welfare at the Swedish University of Agricultural Sciences. There she manages an active research group in animal behavior and welfare. Dr. Keeling received her PhD in zoology from the University of Edinburgh, UK, under the supervision of Professor Ian Duncan. I'm sure he wants me to mention that. And she also has roots here at University of Guelph because Linda and I were postdocs at the same time decades ago, where Linda worked with first with Ian Duncan, left, then came back because she loved Guelph so much, right? And then worked with Professor Hernick, Frank Hernick, for some time. So she does have roots here in Guelph, in the Department of Animal and Poultry Science. It was back then. Her research asks fundamental questions related to social behavior, motivation, and cognition in farm animals, sport animals, and companion animals. And she also does applied work on questions related to the effects of housing and management on animals and on animal welfare assessment methodology. She's active in a number of multidisciplinary projects, lots of species, and also in science-based welfare policy development in the EU. She's a member of the EU platform on animal welfare and works in various projects for the European Food Safety Authority. And she is a fellow of the Royal Swedish Academy of Forestry and Agriculture. My pleasure to hand over to you.
Thank you very much for that introduction. And thank you very much for the invitation to be here today. This is a real honor. And as you heard, I'm great to be back in Guelph again. It's been a while. Okay, so let's get going. This is the title. It has three key phrases that I'm going to be talking about. So it's the scientific perspectives, sustainable development, and farm animals. And in this presentation, I'm going to be not only talking about individual animals, but about animal farming systems generally and animal production globally. So relationships with animals in the broadest sense of the word. But it's not a very catchy title. So the alternative title, which gets straight to the main message, is that animal welfare is part of the solution, not part of the problem. And the problem I'm talking about is this whole area of sustainable development. Animal production sector is under pressure to produce more food, better quality, cheaper prices. But there's a cost. It's also responsible for 1/3 of the greenhouse gas emissions, 1/2 of the land that's used, 4/5 of all water consumption. The figures, they vary. This one came from a recent article in Nature. And here we can say the welfare of animals and farmers is suffering, though. So everybody wants it to be better, okay? The Food and Agricultural Organization even calls it that. I don't know who came up with the idea of the 4 betters, but as you can see here, they want better production, better nutrition, better environment, and a better life. European citizens want it better. This pie chart here is from a Eurobarometer. The European Union runs semi-regular surveys called Eurobarometers. And this is the results of one of the questions about showing that 84% of Europeans believe that the welfare of farm animals should be better protected in the country than it is at the moment. And there are agendas, initiatives to shape the livestock sector, and this is a huge one, the Global Agenda for the Sustainable Livestock, GAZL, the catchy name there. But the underlying view is that animal welfare is one more thing to solve, on top of all the real problems that we have with sustainability in animal production today. And in my talk, I want to convince you that animal welfare has all to do with sustainability. The individual animal is at the core of the sustainability. So that's in the center of the diagram. And if we don't get this right, then the rest is not going to be sustainable either. If this animal is sick or stressed, fearful, it's not going to be a productive or sustainable individual. It's going to be a loser, a poor doer, not worth breeding from, whatever terminology you use here in Canada. And this affects the performance and the economy of the farmer. That's the farmer's sustainability. That's the next circle there, the farm or the animal unit. And what resources the farm uses, so the animal feed, but also the water and the electricity, what the farm produces, the animal products, but also waste products, they impact the sustainable development of the planet. And that's the outer circle here, the region or the global impact. People working in animal sciences, whether you're a nutritionist, a geneticist, you work in meat quality, behavior, whether you're an advisor, used to be an advisor, whatever, we all have an important role. And I actually think we have a responsibility to collaborate amongst ourselves and with farmers to help farmers ensure the welfare, the sustainability of their animals, not only for the sake of the animals, but also for the selfish reason that it benefits us as humans, and it benefits us and our planet here. So, and that's what I tried to capture in that original but not very catchy first title when I was referring to sustainable development of our relationship with farm animals. But I think somehow we've got the balance wrong. Now, there are many things that are wrong in this world at the moment, but the one I'm talking about is the one that I referred to, this pressure on farmers to produce more products, better quality at this lower prices. And it's like a vicious circle, but it's not unique to animal agriculture, but it's a consequence of this focus on economic growth and development rather than sustainable growth and sustainable development. And we're all caught up in it. And the animal agriculture somehow needs to get off this not so merry-go-round, I think, to come down. So to come back to the theme of the talk today, though, although I'm painting this ironic picture, ironically, this bleak picture of the state of animal agriculture here is what makes it exciting time for researchers. And I think if I'm sounding pessimistic for the agricultural situation at the moment, I think when I come to the end of the talk, I'm not so pessimistic. So wait till the end here, because I think I'm quite optimistic because I do see there's a positive future for all of us here. So how am I going to structure this presentation? Well, I'm going to start with the background to some welfare assessment, and then move to the links between animal welfare and the Sustainable Development Goals. And then I'm going to end by presenting some of our work to identify synergies and conflicts between them, or how I think that method might be used in the future to help us all in this situation, so to the benefit. And if you need more convincing of how important the topic is, how important everybody working in agriculture is, then I want to show you this slide. This is a figure of the biomass of domestic mammals, pets and farm animals, compared to wild mammals and humans. I found another table that had livestock in it, And so animals producing labor and commodities for human consumption. So replacing the cat, which is on the back of the sheep, and the dog here, by poultry. But it doesn't make such a big difference. It's still, if you didn't already know, farm animals are really important things. So after that long introduction here, let's come back to the scientific perspective here and talk about welfare assessment, which is a central part of the history of the subject of animal welfare science. And not all of you may be familiar with this thing, so please excuse me for those of you that are. People have had a long relationship to animals, been dependent on them, taking care of them to the best of their knowledge. But the term animal welfare only really came in the 1960s with the publication of this book, Animal Machines. And note the term here that I'm using, animal welfare. Protecting animals for cruelty, beatings, or neglect, all that had been around for several hundred years. That wasn't the issue with this book here. This book coined the term factory farms and tapped into the lack of knowledge in society, at least in Britain, where the book was first published, about how animal agriculture developed. And if you think about it, though, it had become intensive, producing large amounts of food at more affordable prices. It was doing just what society wanted it to do, but then it was being criticized for going too far. So what was the response? Well, what happens when you have an uproar in society? The British government established a committee under the leadership of Professor Robert Rogers Bramble, and they produced a very influential Bramble report in 1965. And they were the first to try and describe animal welfare and what it was that people were concerned about. Why were they concerned about this? And this is the statement that they use when they say, welfare is a wide term that embraces both physical and mental well-being of an animal. And here comes the important part. Any attempt to evaluate welfare, therefore, must take into account the scientific evidence concerning the feelings of animals that can be derived from their structure, functions, and also from their behavior. So the research on assessing animal welfare started. It's actually even in the appendix to that original Bramble report. It's here. It was called The Assessment of Pain and Distress in Animals. I'm not sure if the Bramble report was influenced by Lord Kelvin here. Oops, you don't think the pointer goes that far. But I'm sure you'll recognize this quote. If you can't measure it, you can't improve it. And this is the ongoing struggle to quantify animal welfare, or the indicators of animal welfare. And this is a major theme in the presentation here now. For example, to answer the concern that animals may be frustrated in these intensive systems, researchers developed methods to quantify motivation. And this is an old picture of a hen pushing through a weighted door to get access to different resources. So they could be litter material or nest box or a perch, and you put different weights on the door, so like a little swing door here. And it was found that they were very motivated, and this led to the interest and also to the development of alternative housing systems that contain these resources. So here we have a modified cage, or we have the loose housing systems. And then it came to these complex questions, well, of how do we compare the welfare in these different situations, which is best? I want to remind you that what started in the 1960s is actually continuing. Society is still driving welfare assessment because now it can be good business. In actual fact, welfare scandals are definitely bad business. We can talk about corporate social responsibility. We talk about business benchmarking in animal welfare. And perhaps in the future, there's even going to be an EU animal welfare label. There's a lot of discussion about it. I'm not sure of the situation in Canada, but I imagine you have similar discussions about which systems and how to mark the things, the labels, and how to get the payments for it. All these things are dependent on some form of documented evidence on indicators on the science underlying the claims. And that's where we scientists come in, and where the students that are here today will get involved in this as well. Over the years, there's been a large number of indicators, also called animal-based measures, to make sure that it's clear that they're taken on the animal themselves, and they've been identified. Things like clinical scoring of injuries, scoring degrees of lameness, types and frequencies of vocalizations, abnormal behavior. There's also these new technologies in precision livestock with even more indicators have been investigated and validated. And there's a large conference now that's held welfare assessment at the farm and group level that deals exclusively with welfare assessment, which shows it's just a continuing, thriving area of research 60 years after Bramble report first said we need to start assessing animal welfare. Now, it's not my aim of this project to talk about, to list all these different indicators of animal welfare. Instead, I'm just going to name a few of the very large European projects that have been involved in looking at indicators. And there's a lot of research in this area in other countries as well. I also want to, and from that, we can also be talking about the dimensions and domains to get this holistic view of animal welfare, how many indicators need to be measured if we're going to get this holistic view. And I also want to mention a large ongoing EU-funded network called LIFT, Lifting Farm Animal Lives, which is about laying the foundations of positive animal welfare. So I can hear you thinking now, well, what's the difference between good welfare and positive welfare? In some ways, not a lot, but in the general usage, good welfare has come to mean that an animal doesn't have bad welfare. So happy seems to be the word in advertising these days. So you can see these examples here, and you can wonder what that's based on, how much can we trust these labelings of these adverts here? Even in official control, good welfare usually means no indicators that well, obviously it's not dead, but there's no indicators that that it's not injured, it's not showing disease or stressed or abnormal behaviors. But really, it could be quite low on that scale. It could be quite down at this bad end or the poor end of it, of things. So hence this new phrase, positive animal welfare, which has been defined in a recent publication here as the animal flourishing through experience of predominantly positive mental states in the development of competence and resilience, to try and give this term good welfare a little new view on things. And the important word here is flourishing, and it comes mainly from the human positive psychology literature. And I'm sure you're all aware of all these discussions of how we should be living happier lives and how we should have more positive outcomes. And how we should be flourishing as well. So why am I including this little aside in this discussion on assessing animal welfare? It's because it means, in addition to these indicators of poor welfare that we don't want to find when we're going out to a farm or going to some other facility of this, we now need indicators of positive animal welfare that we do want to find when we go there. The trouble is, though, we have almost no validated indicators of positive good welfare. Yes, we have play and certain types of social grooming, but really there's a lot of work that still needs to be done before we can give this feedback to people of, yes, not only are you not doing a bad job, but you're actually doing a really good job here. Look, these are the indicators. As I said, though, I'm not talking about indicators of animal welfare, but about linking animal welfare to sustainability, although indicators are key in that link. You can maybe recognize these examples about how the welfare of an individual, the core in the center of the diagram, so up there, my animal in the center, can link to the farm and beyond to those outer circles in other ways than the sales of meat or eggs or milk. So how the indicators of welfare link to the three indicators, of the three pillars of sustainability. And the three pillars of sustainability that people talk about are normally economic, social, and environmental. So here are examples to give you an indication of what I mean by these links. So on the left-hand side here, we have a high-producing dairy cow. But then high-producing dairy cows are managing fewer and fewer lactations. Well, they are in Sweden anyway. But the main story here is that, with these fewer lactations, they also have a higher risk of production diseases, mastitis, lameness, and the like. But there are welfare indicators of this, but the main story is that these cows need to be replaced. And there are time and not least economic costs associated with rearing replacement heifers compared to keeping the original cow for longer. If we take the middle example here, we know that stress affects the immunocompetence. Pigs that are stressed need more antibiotics. And we're all aware of the increase in antimicrobial resistance and the threat to future treatment of diseases, which is affecting people globally. And then we go over to the other side here, broilers with poor welfare have less effective use of resources, energy and nutrients, so they need more of these additional resources, and they have to be produced somewhere or somehow. And this means that these resources can't be used for other animals or for people elsewhere. So going from sustainability, I want to make the transition to sustainable development. Of course, I'm not the first to discuss the links between animal welfare and sustainable development. However, it seems people working with sustainable development are not thinking about animal welfare. You'll recognize these, the Sustainable Development Goals from Agenda 2030. And the people behind these were not even thinking about animals, let alone about animal welfare. It's very human-centered. I mean, where were they when they were missing this huge and important sector, the animal agriculture sector? You may have thought, you may have assumed that animals would be mentioned here on life on land. Most of the farm animals are on land here. Or maybe here, responsible consumption and production, but no, animals are not mentioned there. Fish, they're mentioned here, but mainly in relation to humans, in relation to sustainable management of overfishing. So it's, again, from our point, not from the fish's point of view. Whatever. It's also mentioned here, zero hunger, but again, mainly in relation to us humans and about managing genetic resources and productivity, keeping the diversity of our rare breeds so that if we need them, we can put those back in again. If you think back to that figure of the biomass and the weight of animals, then heavens, if you don't take animals into consideration, or if we don't take their welfare and their sustainability, even if we achieve these sustainable development goals, they're not going to be sustainable in the long term. Farm animals are just too big a part of our planet. They're too big a weight on the biomass. They're too important on our planet not to be involved more actively in the thinking about the sustainable development. It wasn't until 2019 in the Global Development Report, it's on the left-hand side, the future is now, where they first recognized, United Nations first recognized that animal welfare is an issue to be dealt with. And there was a big step in 2022 when the United Nations Environmental Assembly adopted a resolution on the animal welfare, environment, sustainable development nexus. That's a mouthful, isn't it? The resolution notes that the health and welfare of animals, sustainable development, and the environment are connected to human health and well-being. And it acknowledges that animal welfare can contribute to addressing environmental challenges, promoting the One Health approach, and achieving sustainable development goals. Most of you heard about One Health, about that our health, human health, is linked to animals and is linked to the health of dependent on the environment, the health of the environment. And for those of you that are new to the area, there's also a One Welfare, which is growing rapidly and gaining momentum, and there's a lot more research in this area. Unfortunately, despite this 2002 United Environmental Assembly, not much is happening. So it was just sort of some signing of some papers there. And in the meantime, research is going on focusing almost exclusively on the problems that are in animal production that we already know about: greenhouse gas emissions, antimicrobial resistant. I mean, those are super important areas. Of course, they're super important. Don't get me wrong, but they're only a part of this bigger picture of sustainable development, as highlighted in those 17 Sustainable Development Goals in this Agenda 2030. So in this next part of the talk, I want to present a method that we've been developing to explore in a more systematic way the links between animal welfare and sustainable development, with a long-term aim of guiding research and activities in this area. To put it simply, we've been looking at this arrow here between animal welfare, and this is the World Organization for Animal Health's definition of welfare. Actually, they haven't come so very far. You can see the similarities here between this and what the Bramble report said about the physical and mental state of the animal. Yeah. And of course, the Sustainable Development Goals, I've already presented them up. And you can say, well, but the Sustainable Development Goals, some people say, well, they're a failure. And well, it's certainly not going very well. If you look at it, only less than 20% of the 169 targets that came up under those 17. So there's the 17 Sustainable Development Goals, and then there's 169 targets underneath. Only less than 20% of those are on target. But others should say, well, you shouldn't give up on this, because actually we don't have any other alternatives. It's going to take too long to get all these people back and to rethink the situation. It took them long enough to agree on these 17. And what these people here say, this is the message by this comment in a journal here, by a collection of big names in the area. And I've just, the part up there where it says the world should redouble its efforts on the SDGs, not abandon them, is just an enlarged version of what it says in the main text for the message. But what I want to point out to you, after doing all the nice and acknowledging the difficulties in extending the Sustainable Development Goals beyond 2030, these authors push to shift the focus from negotiating over problems to delivering solutions and introducing strong enforcement mechanisms. This statement applies equally well to animal welfare, where the focus is also on problems, conflicts with the emissions, food security, food feed controversy, as well as varying enforcement and legislation, which is distorting trade between different countries. Okay. I'm going to present what we did here, and here are some publications on the work. And it allows me to acknowledge my co-authors on this, because it's very much a joint effort. And then I'm going to go on and present some next steps based on what we've learned doing these studies, in case you're interested to adapt some of these research areas or to your own research area or to your work interests. So here's the basic idea. So we think about you here. The basic idea was taken from research on interactions between existing Sustainable Development Goals and the sub-goals, so the targets that I talked about, there's 169. And they were looking, or these authors here, were looking for synergies and conflicts between the existing sub-goals here. And they used a scale, whereas if the two goals go hand in hand, i.e. obtaining one leads to obtaining the other one, then they give it a score of +3. So that's at the top there. All the way down that if the two goals block each other, if obtaining one makes it impossible to attain the other and they cancel each other out, then they call it -3. And what we did, we treated animal welfare like a Sustainable Development Goal. In fact, some people have argued that it should have been an 18th Sustainable Development Goal. Whatever, we asked participants to score how strongly they thought each goal connected to animal welfare, and then in the reverse direction. So how achieving the Sustainable Development Goal would impact on animal welfare, what score would you give it? And also, if we improved animal welfare, how would it impact on sustainable development? And to give you an example, because it sounds a bit vague, doesn't it? Let's take the first one here. End poverty in all its forms everywhere. If we manage to end poverty, if this woman up here on the top there had more money and this other person at the side was not homeless, do you think the welfare of their animals would be better or worse or unaffected? And what score would you give on a rating there from -3 to +3? You have a little think about it. And if we did it in the reverse direction, if we improve the welfare of animals, do you think it would help or do you think it would hinder the move to ending poverty? So if this woman now, if the animals that that woman has up there had better welfare, do you think her economy would be better or worse? And how would you score that? And we repeated this for the 17 questions or for all the SDGs. We asked people to think big, all animal species, all context, and globally. And here are just some pictures to get you thinking about it. It was horses, laboratory animals, fish, farm animals, wild animals. First, we did this as a sort of proof of principle because we wanted to look at that arrow between these ones. What would we find? And then because it was our research question. Of course, it could be specific to farm animals, to certain species, and that's what I'll come back to later, to focus in. But I want to report what we found for this more general question first. So these are the results from the first study. So on the y-axis, so they're going up here, is the effect of achieving the Sustainable Development Goal on animal welfare. And the x-axis, the horizontal one, is the effect of improving animal welfare on the SDGs. And you can see that the scale goes from -3 to +3. So the cross of the little dotted lines, that's the 0 in the middle. And the most striking thing is that the average scores, because these are the average scores, are all up in the top right-hand corner, which means that the scores are positive in both directions. So they're enabling or reinforcing each other. Each circle is one Sustainable Development Goal, and the straight lines are the range of the scores that people gave. So not everybody was positive. You can see some of these lines go down into the negatives of it. The bigger the size of the dot, the stronger the synergy. It's perhaps no surprise that the ones that people rated highest up there, and I've done the pictures of them, these are the ones that I think most people identify as being relevant, most relevant to animals. And that people thought those had the greatest co-benefits and with improving animal welfare. So on average, it seems, at least among the people in response to this, who answered in response to this question, that animal welfare is part of the solution to sustainable development, or that there is a win-win. I said I would be getting more positive. So you're going to say, well, maybe the people she asked are just optimistic, or maybe they were just biased. Are there usually so many synergies when you do this? Well, we didn't know because we hadn't done it before. But I did find another study, and this study is analyzing the links between the official 231 indicators within the United Nations monitoring framework. So this is not a survey. This is not asking people what they think and then thinking, oh, Linda wants me to say positive things about that. These are the actual figures that are showing that that are being recorded to show how the progress is. So these are the decisions of the data that the United Nations has agreed upon. And they found, and here I'm just highlighted the important sentence in their abstract that shows that they found mostly synergies, that's the positive correlations, rather than trade-offs, the negative correlations between indicators. Of course, this doesn't mean we can't all be too optimistic. It doesn't mean there's no conflicts. It just means there's not dominating that. There are more positive things, more synergies out there. So there is hope. So how might we use this knowledge in the area of animal welfare and sustainable development? And we suggest that we could use it as a sort of map to identify synergies and conflicts between sustainable development goals and animal welfare that can help guide future policies and identify strategic partners. Who should we be collaborating with here? And it can also be collaborators for your company or which countries you should be collaborating with or not, but it can also be research partners for future research projects. Here I'm showing the top right-hand corner of that same graph here. So you can see now that the scale goes from 0 to 3 because the scores were only up in the top right-hand one, so I'm not showing the other parts here. Actually, these are the results from our third study where we asked those types of questions. And this was carried out at a global animal welfare workshop in collaboration with the World Organization for Animal Health. So we had many more people taking part from all over the world filling in these questions here. And we found the same pattern as earlier. Given this same pattern, and here I've identified the top 3, the most obvious things would be to use the map to identify potential allies or areas where there are the strongest co-benefits. So from the examples from this one would be 12, consumption, the responsible consumption, 14, it just happens to come up there with the fish, and 3, the human health and human well-being. And I'm just going to say, well, if we chose the number 3, what would that lead us to? Well, it means we should be collaborating on things like zoonoses, diseases that go from animals to humans. Quite relevant now. Anthrozoology. Anthrozoology is the study of human-animal relationships. And maybe some of you, when you saw the title, you thought I was going to be talking about how we should be handling dogs or horses or whatever. That's not what I'm talking about. And then we have this One Health, that our health related to animals and to the environment, and One Welfare that I mentioned before. So seeing this, and there's a lot of money, at least in my university, puts a lot of money now into One Health and saying, oh yes, we have to take a holistic view around this. So this is areas under that would come out from this map, and people have already identified that and are working in these areas. But I think we can be smarter, and we can perhaps find unexpected allies. So this is the same data, but instead of now putting it on the axes, it's as a radar plot. And the lines according to the direction of the impact. So the blue line with the dots, you can see the little axis down here. The blue lines with the dots are the impact of improving animal welfare on achieving the SDG. And the green line with the squares between them are the impact of achieving the SDG on improving animal welfare. So those questions that I asked you before. And on this one, the scale 0 is in the middle, and then we have +1, +2, and +3 going outwards. So the stronger the benefits as you go out. And the faded red circles, those are around the top scoring SDGs from the previous slide that I showed you about. And you can see that they are the ones that are furthest out here. What I'd want to draw your attention to are these 3 new SDGs, where the lines overlap, the blue dot and the green dot are on top of each other. That implies that there's equal impact in both directions, which means collaborating with organizations or researchers or people with a similar interest there, the benefits are going to be mutual. Not as strong as those top 3, but beneficial anyway. And these are important areas. I mean, we're talking about no hunger, worker environment, climate change. There's a considerable amount of work already, and some of you are probably working in this area about animal production, climate change, and also food security. So I want to lift up this about SDG 8. This about the decent working environment and economic growth. How does that link to animal welfare? Well, here you can see we can refer to research and working environments, for example, staff in slaughterhouses, for people catching broilers. It's not easy to be concerned about animal welfare when the work's tough. You can have your dog at work with you. It actually increases your work effectiveness. And it benefits your dog if the option is you're leaving it home alone. So, and we can think here about new markets, potential new markets, and new trade options. Rather than talking about trade barriers, maybe we can have exchanges, more positive side here. And there may be many more ideas of how to look at this, the synergies between animal welfare and decent work environment and to the economic growth bit. The last example then I'm just going to give very quickly, I don't have a slide of it, but it's the number 4 then, the quality education. So here you can see the 2 lines are quite far apart. The blue one is in the middle, or quite in the middle. That means if we improve animal welfare, we're not going to get a better school system or smarter kids or anything like that. Doesn't happen. But we have it, you can see that the green line is much further out. So, and there is a lot of evidence that education is positively related to attitudes towards animals. Better educated people get better jobs. They can afford to spend more on money, and so the farmer can get paid more for producing this. And the kids in the schools, they are the next generation of consumers. So we should be telling them about where your food is coming from and what it costs to produce it and how it's produced. So definitely worthwhile helping improve the level of education because of the indirect effects on animal welfare. It's like a relief for us working at universities and education. Hey, I mean, just wanted to point that one out since I'm here at a university. And at least the people here, though, in our study thought that the benefits of achieving a good education on animal welfare are similar to the SDG 3. So here I also want to, the reason choosing the education one is not just because we're here at the University of Guelph, but if you can see that green line up by the green square there, by 4 is as far out as the one as the SDG 3. That implies that the people here in this Animal Welfare Forum for the World Organization of Animal Health thought improving in education was going to be as important as animal welfare as this one health that we all talk about. So, findings from our research in this area is that how animals live their lives is affecting our lives, and making it better for animals can make it better for us. And whether you're doing that because you want to help animals or whether you're doing it because it's helping you, it doesn't matter. The end result is the same. We want to look for these win-win situations. And what comes out of the analysis in our relationship with animals, when you approach it systematically, when you go through these one at a time, is that there are many synergies. They are these co-benefits, and maybe we're just not looking in the right directions. As I said earlier, we're tending to focus on the problems, the negative things, the conflicts. We're creating these types of conflicts. So if this tool can help us make strategic decisions on how we might apply the method further and find these synergies. Now, I'm not going to go into detail, but I'm just going to go quickly through these types of steps, and you can come and ask me more about this if you want later. But just going through and then me reflecting, or me and my colleagues reflecting back on what we did and what we want to do in the future. Well, our research question was very general. They were like all species globally. I mean, we didn't know what we were going to find. So, you know, cast the net wide. I think the next step could be to implement it in much more specific context. So a specific species, a specific country or region, or a specific type of housing system, or a specific type of management, really focus in on a context. There is some work on antimicrobial resistance, but it's not the same approach as ours. It's based on a systematic literature review, which restricts it to ideas already out there, and you lacks this sort of creativity. Where are the new options? But it's an example of this area. There's a lot of work on taking holistic one welfare view with working equids. The horse welfare organizations are very active in these areas, linking it to human welfare as well. And we've looked at had examples with students on these working equids and also salmon farming in Norway, when we had a PhD course where we got students working on case studies, looking for synergies and conflicts in these areas related to their PhDs and to the research that was going on then at the university. And last one here, broiler production in Sweden. That's because that's my research project now. We've just started. So a species, we're going specific, broiler production, country and region, Sweden. These sustainable development goals, they're not, you know, the global south or whatever. Sweden has a lot of problems and could be doing a lot more. So we're doing the broiler production in Sweden, and we're doing it together with the industry because they really want to find the win-wins and to be able to present this to consumers as well. So those are just some examples here. The other next thing is that I think we should have a broad range of participants and a sufficient diversity of people doing the scoring so that all the relevant issues are raised. You don't want to hear later on when you've invested a lot of money, oh, why didn't you think about that? So in our studies so far, we've had animal scientists and veterinarians doing the scoring because that was our target group. But even here, we found some regional differences. and differences according to the income of the country of the participants in the larger one here. So this was our largest study, and we found actually, if you're interested, that the main differences were around SDG 11 about sustainable cities, which is quite logical when you think about if people are worried about their economies or things. But even if there was a significant number of people doing this, when you start splitting it up into the different regions, I think it would be important to support, to repeat that or to check it again. But there is a lot of research and bigger surveys showing that there are differences in the perceptions of animal welfare vary in different countries. So it's important in the future when you're that the scoring captures the relevant cultural or stakeholder views for that research context. So you really need to get all those different views in. And then the scoring itself. We've presented individual scores since we were interested in the variation between people. Why did people score this? Why did you give it a 2 and you gave this a +3 or whatever? But in the future, when you're wanting to be going to all these solutions, you want to have more of an iterative process. You want to have some sort of discussions backwards and forwards, having searches for evidence. What can we base this on? And to try and reach consensus, some sort of Delphi process or exchange in a good way so that you work forward to come up with a score here and an agreement on that. So the aim would be to have the map as factually based as possible, based on as much data as there is out there, in the same way as they did for that United Nations when they had those 261 indicators. We can find those indicators of production and welfare. Now, there are many ways to visualize the links. We did that circle, the radar plot up there, the heat map, and then the network. That's what the original people who were doing this methodology, when they were looking at sustainable development, they were doing something in water conservation. So the aim, doesn't matter how you do it, but the aim is to get the overview of the links. What's the pattern of the scores in the context, this specific context that you're looking at? And it's not going to look the same as the ones we found out when we did animal welfare and the global and all things. But once you have that, and once the strategic decision has been made, okay, this is interesting, we're going to focus here, then you can select the appropriate indicators. So here we can say this is the area of our animal welfare sustainable development thing that we want. This is the area of our relationship to animals that we want to reassess. This is where we want to look at it and find out ways forward. And that's when you go on and try and select the indicators. Of course, the animal welfare indicators that I mentioned but kept on saying I'm not going to talk about. We have a lot of those. But also, there are all these indicators already out there about sustainable development goals. And we have all our indicators from the industry that we're using as well. So there's lots of different metrics that we can be using to compare that are science-based, and that we can compare these approaches in moving forward and monitoring progress to make sure that we are really in this win-win situation. Personally, as I said, I'm more interested in putting my research efforts where there are more benefits, the win-wins from my map. And of course, I'm interested in this collaboration with the Swedish broiler industry to find areas where we can work together in another project and get money to do it, and I can carry on my research and it benefits them. Things. So I would much rather work in synergies in these things than to be focusing on things where there's a conflict of it. These are problem areas where there are conflicts. We don't need to, yes, they need to be solved, but why are we only looking at those and not making progress on the ones that are where everybody wants and benefits from moving forward? I think at the moment we're focusing on problems and we're not getting very far. So let's focus a little bit more on these other ones. So in conclusion, so my last slide here, I think we do need to reassess our situation, our relationship to animals. We can't continue to be on this producing more and more cheaper and cheaper. We really do have to get off this not so merry-go-round, as I put it. But it's got to be in a way that works for everybody. So and I believe that how animals live their lives is affecting our lives, and that making it better for animals can make it better for us. So that's the positive part of it. I said I would end on an optimistic note of this. Secondly, I think this lack of systematic approach has to assessing the strength of the relationships had led to us, as I say, focusing on conflicts. Animal welfare is seen as part of the problem, whereas just in this case, I think it can be part of the solution. There's a good toolbox of indicators out there that we can use in combination with the environment and sustainability indicators to monitor progress. Remember that quote, if you can't measure it, you can't improve it. I think the problem is that we're just overwhelmed, or I feel overwhelmed by the complexity of this thing, of where we're going in the world. So, I mean, we need to start thinking a little bit strategic about this. And I think animal scientists and all the people working directly and indirectly with animal production have an important role in identifying these fruitful areas so that we can continue to have that are valid and reliable and science-based monitoring of progress, because I think we need to be making progress in this area. So with that, I say thank you very much.